Okay, we'll make a start. Hello everyone, and thank you so much for joining us this evening. My name is Don Baker, and I'm leading on the development of the local nature recovery strategy for our county here at West Sussex County Council. To start this webinar, I'm going to firstly hand over to Councillor Deborah Urquhart, and then on to my colleague Kate Cole, who's going to take you through our presentation tonight.
Hello, I'm Councillor Deborah Urquhart, Deputy Leader and Cabinet Member for the Environment and Climate Change for West Sussex County Council. I wanted to welcome you this evening to this Sussex Nature Recovery webinar about our beautiful county. I'm delighted that so many of you signed up for today's event to hear about our habitats and species and the actions being taken locally to recover them. Nature is all around us, and West Sussex is blessed with wondrous examples, from our incredible harbours and wetlands to the rolling hills of the South Downs. Chichester Harbour is the largest area in the UK for intertidal carbon sink and habitats. The High Weald AONB is the most wooded AONB in the country. West Sussex is the second most wooded county in England, with over half of its woodland designated as ancient, covering 10% of the county. Nature can, of course, be found in our nature reserves and national landscapes, but it's also on our farmland, in our gardens and in our vibrant towns. It supports our economy, helps us grow food, makes us happy, healthy, and feel connected to one another. But as we know, nature is also in trouble and we must act urgently. Tonight, we'll hear about the progress being made to develop a local nature recovery strategy for West Sussex and why this is needed. But we'll also hear inspiring examples of local people, communities, organisations, farmers, individuals who have already taken action to restore our habitats and support our wildlife. It is my ambition to go much further than the government's ask, and I know it is yours too. Finally, we'll hear about some of the ways you can get involved to help nature in this wonderful county we call home. Thank you for showing an interest in this important issue and giving up some of your free time to find out more. I now hand you over to the presenters for the evening.
Well, thank you, Councillor Urquhart, and thank you, Don, as well. And good evening, everybody. As Don says, my name's Kate Cole, and I'm part of the team working with Don on developing this strategy. So just with a bit of housekeeping to start off with, if you have any technical problems, if you can't hear us properly or you're having trouble seeing the slides, do put it in the chat and our tech people in the background will be able to help you. We are recording this session and we're going to be uploading it onto the Sussex Nature Recovery website in the next week. Unfortunately, we don't have time for questions and answers today, but we do want to hear from you. So if you do have questions, please put them in the chat. We will take those away and we'll come up with answers and put them on the website in our FAQ. Just to let you know, we've got quite a lot to get through this evening. We're going to do our very best to stick to the hour, but we may go over by a few minutes, so do bear with us if we do. So this webinar is all about the local nature recovery strategy for West Sussex. So what we're going to take you through this evening has been informed from a number of places. There's the ecological evidence that we've been gathering as part of the process, and all the knowledge that we and our partners in the working group collectively hold. But it's also been informed by you. We've had over 1,750 of you who've got in contact via our survey and told us what's important to you. So thank you very much to that. And we're going to be playing back some of what you've told us today. And it's also been inspired by some of the amazing nature recovery efforts already taking place across West Sussex. And I'm delighted that tonight we have representatives from 4 of those projects who are going to be sharing their work with us. But before we talk about the strategies, let's talk about nature, and specifically our nature. As Councillor Urquhart said, we're blessed with stunning natural harbours, as beautiful as they are internationally important for their migratory birds, as well as being a haven for all sorts of other wildlife. Our topography is synonymous with our rolling hills of the downland and our woods with their spectacular bluebell walks. We've got rivers flowing through some of the most picturesque countryside in the south of England. But arguably, the jewels in the crown are our national nature reserves. One example is Ebenow Common, with its ancient wood pasture. This, along with the nearby Men's Woodland, support a whole myriad of species, including some of our rarest bats. We've got barbicels and bechsteins there. And we've got some incredibly important and rare habitats. I have a particular soft spot for vegetated shingle. Outside Northwest Europe, you only find this in Japan and New Zealand. It's an internationally and globally threatened habitat, incredibly specialised. There's only 5,000 hectares in the whole of the UK, and 20% of that is in Sussex. Chalk grassland is one of the most biodiverse habitats in Western Europe. It's now very rare and fragmented, and it's, again, of international conservation importance. But the South Downs National Park has some of the finest remaining examples. As Councillor Urquhart said, a lot of our woodland is ancient. It's classed as an irreplaceable habitat because it takes hundreds of years to establish. Some of the yews in Kingley Vale are reported to be over 2,000 years old. And then we have our coastal habitats, salt marsh and mudflats found around Chichester and Pagham harbours and along our rivers, the Arun and the Ada. They're an amazing habitat, support a huge variety of bird life, also provide a nursery ground for fish, but they also store carbon and filter water and protect our coasts from flooding. The mudflats are just as important. Some people don't like mudflats. I think they're great. They don't look like there's much there, but as the tide goes out, there's an invaluable food source for birds. Apparently, 1 square metre of mudflats equivalent energy to a Mars bar. And we have some really interesting and rare species as well. You may or may not know that we have peregrines nesting in Chichester. And of course, we have our breeding terns, 3 species of them within Chichester Harbour. We have some of our rarest orchids within West Sussex. We've got the man orchid at Wolstonbury Hill and the lizard orchid near Arundel. And bats, this slide says 18 species. There's actually 19 species. The 19th is the greater mouse-eared bat. There's only 2 individual bats left in the entire country, and they're both in West Sussex. And when it comes to invertebrates, we have them aplenty as well. The purple emperor, possibly one of our most striking, is now widespread in West Sussex. Key sites being South Water Woods and Knepp, which is reckoned to be the best site in the county, in the UK, I beg your pardon, for the species. So those are some of the really special habitats and species that we share our home with. But where do you like to go to experience nature? Well, through our surveys, we've been asking you where your favourite places are and why. And we've been plotting the answers that we're getting on an interactive map, which you can go and have a look at on our website and have a little play with. So far, we've had about 285 places mentioned. The most popular for West Sussex residents are your local beaches. So 9% of you like to experience nature at your local beach. But the South Downs National Park was up there as well, followed by your own gardens. And our harbours were high up on the list as well. It's great to see that you can find nature in so many different places across West Sussex. What's really interesting, though, is that although the sites themselves differ, woodlands are obviously very different from beaches, the reasons why people like to visit them are often very similar. 11% of you said things like tranquility, peace, and quiet. So that shows how spending time in nature is so important to our well-being, restores us, gives us a break from the modern world. And lots of you also mentioned local and close or near. So it shows why it's so important to have nature in close proximity to us. And we asked you what your favourite habitats in Sussex were and why. It's quite a difficult question to answer, actually, but it gives us a sense of what people really enjoy and what you encounter most as well. So our top 5 habitats, it's like the charts, 23% of you were woodlands, which is not surprising when you can consider we're the 2nd most wooded county in the country. We had coastal and marine, riverine, chalk habitats and hedgerows. And just a sample of why people love them is shown on this slide here. One really interesting comment we got about the hedgerows is how people view them. You don't just see them as homes for birds and other wildlife, but you see them as these essential wildlife corridors that connect fragmented habitats together and help wildlife to move across the landscape. And we asked you about your favourite species as well. Overwhelmingly, you like birds. 47% of responses cited birds, either a particular species or a subcategory like garden birds or waders, or just birds generally. So within those, the top ones mentioned were red kites, kingfishers, and the lowly robin. It's not really surprising that people love birds so much. They're frequent visitors to our gardens. We can see them, we can hear them, particularly at this time of year. So they're that tangible connection with the wilder world, which we don't necessarily have with other wildlife. So sticking with birds, I'm now going to hand over to Adam Hutley from the Sussex Ornithological Society.
Thanks very much, Kate. So yeah, my name's Adam, and I'm representing the Sussex Ornithological Society tonight. I'm a member of the SOS, as we call it, or SOS, depending on where you want to use that phrase. And I'm also an active volunteer for them as well. I'm hugely passionate about birds, habitat and conservation, and love being immersed in nature. I think it's great for mental health, and it's a great way to unwind and relax away from the day-to-day hustle and bustle. So I'm going to cover a couple of things tonight. Firstly is the neighbourhood survey initiative, which we've launched this year at the Sussex Ornithological Society. And also I'm going to just delve quickly into one species, the corn bunting, just to give you a little bit of insight about how the bird is, the recovery that's happening, and why it's so important to do surveys. So just starting with the Sussex Ornithology. This was set up in 1962 by a group of birders, and today it's probably cited as one of the biggest bird clubs in Great Britain, and it has over 2,000 members, which is quite phenomenal. The founding goals were naturally to record and study wild birds in the county of Sussex, but actually to look at assisting conservation in a bigger way, and contributing to the Great British surveys as well. But really importantly, is to engage and inspire and educate people to appreciate and understand birds in their habitat. Something that we've just got to work on much more. And it's that really helping people to understand birds in their habitat that led us to launch the new initiative, which we called the Neighbourhood Survey Initiative. So we're getting loads of interest from groups like the Arran to Ada Farmer Cluster, various landowners and separate land managers, plus private individuals and people that own private estates. So really it's in response to those inquiries. People just seem to be more and more interested in what birds they have on their land. We called it neighbourhood because absolutely positively we wanted to keep the low carbon conversation on the table. We don't want people driving around to do surveys all over Sussex with a huge carbon footprint. So we're absolutely keen to keep it sort of low carbon and pair people where we can, birders and landowners, in the same proximity. It's not always essential to use an ecological study. So the idea of this is to fill that void where someone is very interested, but they don't want to go to those troubles. It will be easier just to send in some people to have a look to see what birds could be present at the time or what could be present moving forward if we worked on habitat. So a lot of this is about actually really knowledge sharing, because as birders, we can go in and talk to the landowners, we can tell them what birds are present, and we can also work to improve the habitat to attract different types of birds. So really joining the dots, it's all a bit of a collaboration to bigger projects as well, because actually then it does start bringing in bigger projects as a result of that. So I'm just going to dive into one specific bird, although there's pretty many that we could go into. But I'm going to use the corn bunting as a good example, because actually, although this looks a bit like doom and gloom, you see lots of red all over this chart, it's a bird that's got a really good stronghold in Sussex. We see them all the time on the Downs. I do surveys up in Burpham on the Duke of Norfolk's land, and the corn buntings up there are plentiful. But actually, from a wider picture, it is a bird that is now on the red list. So that means it's of conservation concern, and it has been since 1996. I think the steep decline really happened through the 80s and the 70s and 80s, and that was really down to farming practices. There was a huge change in how farming practices went then, and it's really that decline that drove that change. And the last and rather sad fact that we've got here is that the losses in Ireland were so great that it's now extinct in Ireland, and there's a sort of 56.8% contraction of the habitat and the territories of these corn buntings. So it might look like a fairly insignificant bird to you, but it's got a lovely song. That would be a male sat up singing, trying to attract a mate. And that picture I took in Beachy Head about 2 weeks ago. But actually, it's not all doom and gloom, because actually, although there was a huge decline, the recovery hasn't really started, but the bird is fairly stable. And it's by doing surveys that we're going to get that information. It's very hard for people to get as many troops on the ground as needed without a huge cost, and so volunteers are hugely important to data, which we all need to keep an eye on these birds. And we can all help, as Kate alluded to. I think nature needs us more than ever, although you could argue that we need nature. And there's several ways you can help. Obviously, volunteering. There's plenty of places that you can do volunteering through. So many organisations in Sussex that will take volunteers, and you don't need to be a professional. You can do volunteering at any level. There's donations, which you can either do privately or maybe through your workplace. You could join the SOS, which we would all like, even though we've already got an awful lot of members. And one of the most easy and fun things to do, and this became really prevalent through COVID, was to actually start recording birds. And Merlin app is just such a good app. So even if you've got no experience with birds, Merlin is wonderful. Download it, it's free. If a bird is singing, you can press record and it'll tell you what the bird is. If you've got a picture of the bird, you can use that as well, and it'll pick it up. And it's pretty good. It's hard to catch it out, although you can do. But generally speaking, it's a really good app. For surveys that we do, we use BirdTrack, because the data that we input into BirdTrack goes back to the county recorder. And that, again, without sort of repeating myself, that data is absolutely key to us understanding the trends of birds, bird breeding, and bird migration. So if you don't do anything, or if you can do one thing, I would definitely suggest you download Merlin. It's really good fun. You can do it just walking around, you can do it in your garden, you can do it anywhere, take it down the beach, and you'll be surprised what birds are there and how quickly you can learn their call. And in a whistle-stop tour, that is me. Thank you very much indeed. And I think I'm handing back to you, Kate, is that correct?
Yes, that's right. Thanks for that, Adam. That's absolutely fascinating and fantastic to see what a difference volunteers can make. It really is important. Okay, so we've heard a little bit about what we have. We've been focusing in this first section on the incredible nature that we have around us. This next section, unfortunately, reminds us of the dire state of nature in the UK at the moment. 1 in 6 species is at risk of going extinct. We've seen something like a 55% decline in farm and birds since the 1970s. More than half of our plants have decreased their distribution. And we're seeing something like 75% decline of hedgehogs in rural areas. And we are officially, and quite depressingly, one of the most nature depleted countries in the world. But why? Why is nature declining? Well, there's lots of reasons, but some of the most obvious are on this slide here. There's the loss of habitat through, for example, development or urbanisation. The remaining habitats we do have are not necessarily in good condition. And habitats are fragmented. It means they're small and isolated from each other. So they're less able to cope with these pressures, and wildlife can't move safely across the landscape. And we're seeing a loss of the abundance of certain species, with more species being threatened. Climate change, pollution, development, other pressures have already taken their toll, and they're going to further push nature into decline unless we can make it more resilient. But it's important to note that we're not just, with that decline, we're not just losing biodiversity, we're also losing all those benefits that a healthy natural environment brings. So it's things like clean air and water, shade, flood management, health and well-being, carbon storage, all those sorts of things. So these pressures and the state of nature is why coordination is needed at the local level to agree where and how we need to act. So in our survey, we've been asking you to tell us what you've noticed, and nearly 3/4 of you have seen some sort of negative changes to habitats, and nearly 70% have seen a decrease in the number of species. Almost all of you, 97%, are concerned or very concerned about the state of nature in Sussex. But what have you seen specifically? Well, we've just selected a tiny representative sample of the thousands of comments that we've received here. You've talked about the continual loss of habitats that you've seen. So with things like new housing developments and urbanisations, those are the most frequently mentioned. You've noticed that our nature is being pushed out, that more wildlife is at risk of being killed on our roads because we're losing those safe corridors. And you've noticed that habitats are often in poor condition with pollution, sewage, chemical use and poor behaviours often cited as causes. Amongst these habitats in decline, verges and hedgerows, either because they're full of litter or they're cut badly or at the wrong time, were frequently mentioned, probably because they're some of the most visible examples of bad practices for many. And you've been telling us about the losses you've seen to species as well. More than half of you have noticed a significant decline, particularly to bird life and insects. But you've talked about seeing far fewer hedgehogs, amphibians, reptiles, along with many, many other species, birch trees to slowworms, rockpool shrimps to hares. What was really palpable in the survey responses we've had so far is the collective sadness and distress at what you're seeing. It really is, it's quite heartbreaking. So we know that the need to recover nature has never been greater, but what does that look like? Well, there isn't really a standard definition. Generally, though, it means taking action to restore or create or expand or connect these habitats together. So it's to support, it's to enable wildlife to thrive, but it's also to mitigate climate change by building up these resilient landscapes. Fundamentally, though, it's about bigger, better, and more joined up wildlife-rich habitats. In practice, this can take many forms. It might be from large-scale projects that cover hundreds, even thousands of hectares with multiple partnerships and organisations. It might be a community group creating a new wildflower strip within their village, right down to putting up a Swift box on your own house. And we urgently need these large initiatives, but these small actions are just as important as well. So nature in Sussex, West Sussex already has some protection. Over half of the county has some form of designation, either because it's part of a protected landscape, or it's a local wildlife site, or a SSSI. And there's a huge number of partnerships and initiatives that are already collaborating for nature. In West Sussex, we've got pioneering landscape and seascape scale cross-sector nature partnerships. They involve the councils, landowners, organisations and community groups. And we've got lots of farmer-led projects as well, including our farm clusters. At the grassroots level, we've got friends of groups and active environmental groups who are helping to bring nature back to our towns and villages. And there are lots of others who are trying to make it their priority to engage with some of the harder to reach audiences, including young people. So one example of that is Sussex Wildlife Trust's Youth Rangers initiative. This is part of the Gatwick Green Space Partnership. And I'm going to hand over to Tamara Jewell now from Sussex Wildlife Trust to tell us more.
Hi, so I'm Tamara and I'm the Community Project Officer on a project called the Gatwick Green Space Partnership. I'm going to talk to you today about our Youth Rangers group, Wildlife Rangers and Youth Rangers. Our project works across 200 square kilometres of countryside. We aim to inform, educate, involve a diverse range of people from our local communities taking action for wildlife. So what does this look like? Well, my job's mainly working with young people in events and education, and we have all sorts of different opportunities for people to take action. So here's a flavour of some of that. Last year we did 108 events for young people. This involved over 1,500 attendances of children under 16 and 820 people aged over 16. And you're never too young to take action for wildlife. But as I said, we are concentrating on the older groups today. So we have our Youth Rangers group for 16 to 25-year-olds and Wildlife Rangers for 12 to 16-year-olds. And they have a real focus on improving habitats for wildlife in our area. So this photo shows Crawley College students helping to maintain our heathland patch at Tilgate Park, but we do lots of different types of activities. So you can see some of those activities here. One of my favourite things that we've done in recent years is hedge laying. So we've done this at Warnham Nature Reserve in Horsham and also more recently at Tilgate Park. So in 2021, the group embarked on laying this hedge, which is using a traditional craft. And it's a great thing to do. It looks a bit brutal when it's first complete, but just a few months later, you can see it bounces back beautifully and provides this corridor for wildlife to move, shelter and feed in. And also our wildlife rangers and youth rangers work in a garden that we have at Tilgate Park, a wildlife garden. And we harvest produce here, cook it up on the campfire if it doesn't get eaten by the wildlife first. And the group have been recently picked as an inspirational case study by the Coronation Gardens website. So they feature on there on a page encouraging schools to pledge to learn more about wildlife gardening. So I'm finishing with a little video of wildlife rangers in action. I'm really proud of the young people that I work with in Sussex, and they are engaged with nature's recovery. I hope you find them inspiring too. Thank you very much. So today was a day of wildlife rangers, which is for 12 to 16-year-olds. So we started by taking all the kit into the woods and then doing some work in our heathland patch, where we'd started already building a hibernacular, which is a cosy home for reptiles whilst they hibernate over winter. So we had already dug out a big hole in the ground and put in some really big logs in, and then this group covered those logs with more brash and other small logs. We put some clay, a couple of layers of clay on top, and then covered the whole thing above ground with a layer of clay, and then turfed the top of it. So that then creates a really warm home with lots of nooks and crannies for things like snakes to go and hide and live in. So that was the task. We also threw in a bit of fire lighting at lunchtime so that we could heat a kettle, make some hot chocolate, more importantly toast marshmallows and eat s'mores. And then we cleared an area around our lizard lounge where we hope that lizards are going to bask. We created that a couple of years ago, so we just cleared around that so it wasn't shaded out. And we'd already previously built a hibernacular 2 or 3 years back, which was now covered in brambles, so we also cleared around that hibernacular too. So we finished a new one, we refurbished an old one, and then finished the day with a game.
That was brilliant. Thank you, Tamara. I think every day should finish with water pistols personally, but there we are. So, as we've heard, Action for Nature is already underway across the county, which is brilliant. And we asked you, or we've been asking you through our surveys, whether you've noticed any of these positive changes. And a quarter of you have, which is great. You've noticed improvements to habitats. Slightly smaller proportion, only 10% noticing an increase in some species. So what have you seen? Well, lots of you have talked about habitats being restored at Pagham Harbour and Medmery, and the rewilding work at Knepp has been mentioned lots of times, as well as improvements at Buchan Country Park. You've seen an improvement in lots of management practices as well, particularly happy to see verges and hedgerows and other green spaces cut less often or less harshly. And you're starting to see some more of our wildlife as well. Lots of you have mentioned increases in certain types of birds like egrets and birds of prey. And really inspiringly, lots of you have been very proudly telling us about nature returning to your own gardens and local areas after making changes there. So seeing nature return when so much has been lost is incredibly powerful, and it gives us hope. And so too is being able to join forces with like-minded others to affect these positive changes locally. So on that note, I'm now going to hand over to Laura Eastwood from Greening Steyning, which is an amazing, active, organised and enthusiastic community group who are delivering a big ambition.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to talk to you a little bit about greening Steyning, Bramber and Beeding this evening, and to highlight what is possible with local action for local nature recovery. So we're a group of like-minded individuals, volunteers, who've come together to focus on creating a sustainable low-carbon future for Steyning, Bramber, Upper Beeding and the surrounding area. The group was first established in 2010 by individuals who had a shared concern for the climate and an understanding that urgent climate action was required. But actually it was the disruption and uncertainty created by the coronavirus that really helped people to reassess what was important to them, to reconnect with the environment, and to get to know our community a little bit more deeply. So we decided to put together our 2030 vision. This was not about Greening Steyning doing it alone. This was about bringing the community along with us. So we conducted a community survey to better understand what it was that our neighbours wanted, what projects would they like to see us carrying out. We also did a wildlife survey to see what wildlife was already found within our gardens, within our streets, and we did a habitat survey to focus on areas where change was possible. And it was all of this together that helped us to create the projects that we run today. So our projects fall broadly under two categories: footprint reduction and nature recovery. Footprint reduction is then further broken down into waste reduction and a focus on carbon footprint reduction. Waste reduction includes a repair cafe, a community fridge, recycling projects at our local farmers market, while carbon footprint reduction focuses on home energy. Where can we possibly get the right grants to help our neighbours put solar panels on their roofs? What kind of green energy is suitable for different homes? What can we do to make our homes more energy efficient? We also looked at transport, discussing carbon footprints and what could be done on a transport level. So is this greater use of local buses? Is this use of electric vehicles, or greater infrastructure for bikes and footpaths and walking? The nature recovery is very much around connected habitats. And we conduct two types of projects that help us to try and connect habitat areas to one another. The first is hedgerow surveys. So we work with local landowners to survey hedgerows and identify areas where improvements can be made. The great thing is actually the majority of the hedgerows that we've surveyed so far have been really fantastic. As you can see in the picture, there are some areas that have needed to be replanted, and we've done this in partnership with Steyning for Trees. And it's really important to us that we work with local partners, with other groups working in the communities, to ensure that everything we do is as productive and efficient as possible. And the reality is we have a shared vision. The second project we run is in partnership with the parish councils and West Sussex County Council, and it's called our Life on the Verge project. The primary aim is to increase the number of plant species found on our wild verges. And our wild verges, we've got 4 across the communities that we're testing out the project on. And what it means is they're cut less often, they're cut just once a year. And we remove the cuttings when they are cut. What this does is it favours wildflowers and it reduces the amount of grasses hopefully found on the verges. What this aims to do is not only increase the number of plant species found, which in itself is an achievement, but it also looks to provide different food sources for pollinators, vital pollinators that help our crop pollination. And it's these stepping stone verges that between larger areas of habitat that can provide a food source and provide a way for pollinators as well as other animals to disperse within our community and amongst different areas of habitat. So it's as simple as raking off the cuttings when they are cut and conducting yearly surveys of the verges. It's a really simple project but could have a really big impact. But I just want to leave you with this message. We can all make a difference, whether we have 5 hours a week, 30 minutes a week, whether we're full-time, whether we're retired, we can all get involved, whether it's volunteering for Greening Steyning or your local group, or even setting up a group of your own. Every small action has a great cumulative impact. Thank you so much for listening. Have a nice evening.
Thank you, Laura. That was amazing. And it's such a good example of what a difference community groups can make. Okay, so we've heard about the problem. We've heard about what the solution can look like. So how do local nature recovery strategies fit into all of this? Well, these are a new legal requirement that come out of the Environment Act, and they're being rolled out across the whole of England. And generally speaking, they're executed at the county level. They cover that entire area, so they're working at that landscape scale. But they're designed to be collaboratively produced by the people who live and work in that county. So the aim is to agree at the local level what the priorities and actions are that are needed to drive nature's recovery and all those wider environmental benefits that we get from a healthy environment. There are 48 of these strategies being developed across England. We're number 47. And each of these is led by a responsible authority, which is normally the county council. So West Sussex County Council is the responsible authority for your local nature recovery strategy. But there are actually 2 strategies being developed for Sussex. One covers West and the other covers East Sussex and Brighton and Hove. Now we've got across West and East Sussex, we've got a really strong culture of working close together, and we have a lot of pan-Sussex stakeholders like the Sussex Wildlife Trust and the South Downs National Park and the Sussex Nature Partnership, to name but a few. So it makes sense if we collaborate, if we work closely together to develop these strategies. So we're doing that under the banner of Sussex Nature Recovery. Once complete, these Sussex local nature recovery strategies will join up with the 46 others to create an England-wide nature recovery network. But as well as talking to each other, we're also talking to our county neighbours in Hampshire and Kent and Surrey, so that we can share learning and we can ensure their support for any kind of cross-boundary initiatives and corridors and things like that. Now, it's worth bearing in mind that this is a new process, it's a new initiative, and although all these 48 strategies are being developed at the same time, everybody's using a slightly different approach, and the progress they're making varies across the country. Some councils are further ahead, some are further behind, we're probably about in the middle. And it all depends on where you're starting from. How much ecological data and evidence have you got to start with? How much resource have you got? What are your existing partnerships like? It's also worth bearing in mind that this is just the first round. This is an iterative process. There's a lot that we'll learn from it and from our county neighbours as well. Now, the steps that we have to follow in developing a local nature recovery strategy are set out in regulations and statutory guidance. And they're here. So what we have to do to start off with is map the existing areas that are important for biodiversity in the county, and that's effectively designated sites. Then we need to gather together all the issues that are most important to local people. So we're doing that via our surveys and the conversations we're having. So please do let us know if you haven't already. And then together we can agree what the priorities are for nature's recovery within West Sussex. From there, we can map proposals for creating or improving habitats, helping species and delivering those wider environmental benefits. So in LNRS lingo, these actions to deliver priorities are called measures. And then the final strategy is actually in 2 parts. So there's a statement of biodiversity priorities and a local habitat map, and that will be the local nature recovery strategy. And then these will be reviewed every 3 to 10 years. Now, there are some things that are beyond the scope of a local nature recovery strategy. they won't help protect more places. So being mapped or otherwise identified in the strategy doesn't confer any new protection. They also can't dictate how land is used. So even if a landowner puts forward an action that they're going to undertake on their own land, which we then map or capture in the strategy somehow, there's no obligation on the landowner to carry out that action. And while we can flag the impact that pressures like pollution and housing can have on nature in Sussex in these strategies, we can't tackle the sources of those pressures if they're covered by other frameworks. But what the strategies will do is bring forward opportunities to create or improve habitat and that support species recovery. It's about capturing deliverability, capturing the willing. It will help us find those little pockets of energy where we've got existing projects or supportive communities and landowners, and where there are real ecological opportunities to restore habitats, or where there's marginal land that isn't necessarily suited for food production. They will help direct future effort and funding through financing mechanisms like biodiversity net gain and environmental land management schemes. And they will inform the planning process and the duty that falls on every public body, including councils, to have regard to biodiversity. And they'll give a framework for all these existing nature recovery initiatives that are going on. They aren't a replacement for these. They're not going to take away funding from them. Instead, you can kind of think of the strategy as a sort of container that helps us understand what's already going on, where the appetite is, and how we can build on this and connect it and extend it. So it's about aiding collaboration. It's helping the public and the private and the voluntary sectors work more effectively together. So ultimately, it's about ensuring the right things are done in the most effective places. So this slide shows the various components that need to be undertaken to deliver an LNRS. So I ran through those briefly before. And this is where we are in the process. So we've already published the map to show where the areas of particular importance are, and that's on our website, along with a report on pressures and threats. So do take a look at those. And what we're doing at the moment is gathering a long list of priorities. Once we've got that long list, we have to shortlist it, what the real priorities are. And then we can begin capturing and mapping the measures. And then there'll be a public consultation of the strategy early next year. And we're aiming to publish in the summer of 25. So I mentioned that we're currently gathering this long list of priorities, and there's 4 main sources for this. So there's the ecological evidence, and a lot of it comes from you and what other Sussex residents are telling us via our surveys. So very many thanks to the more than 1,700 of you who've already told us what you think. We're having lots of conversations with community groups and organisations working for nature in Sussex. And we've undertaken a huge exercise to comprehensively review all of the plans and published plans and strategies across Sussex. So this is everything from local plans, cross-county management plans, tree and woodland strategies, even neighbourhood plans that are down to parish level. And by taking that approach, we're able to recognise and acknowledge the huge amount of work that's already taking place across the county for nature, rather than starting from a blank sheet. So that list of priorities is still being gathered, still an opportunity to feed into it, but we're already thinking about how to organise it even before we start shortlisting. Now, what the statutory guidance requires us to do is to bring that long list down to a manageable number of agreed critical priorities that reflect a balance, suggestions from local partners, and support national environmental objectives. So on this slide, what you can see is a kind of emerging set of organising principles, if you like. So what we don't want to do is pit one habitat against another or one species against another species. So if we kind of think about things meeting these broad principles, it will enable us to kind of group these priorities together in service of this sort of overarching aims for nature. So this is very early thinking at the moment that we're sharing with you today. We will be posting more on this on the website. So do take a look and let us know what you think. So these these organising principles, if you like, chime what we're hearing from you through the survey responses we've had so far. So you've told us that you want to see more of all types of habitats. You want to see better care being taken of what's left. You want there to be more of these wildlife corridors where you've got species being able to move across the landscape. You want our habitats to be productive, not just for food, but for clean air and water and shade and flood management and carbon storage. And you want nature nearby. What's really interesting is that you want us to strike a balance between close local wildlife, local green spaces being good for nature and good for people. They don't always go hand in hand. But what you've also told us is that 85% of you, just knowing that action is taking place for nature is really important. So nature needs our help, and we've got to have urgent, large-scale action now. But as we develop this local nature recovery strategy, we can take comfort from what's already going on in Sussex. There's a huge amount of ambition and innovation across lots of sectors to make a difference. So they're inspiring, they're leading the way and demonstrating the art of the possible. Our protected landscapes give us a really good, strong underpinning in terms of their resources and the strategies that they have in place. We've got a good, strong foundation for delivery. As we've heard, there's lots of existing relationships and a desire to work together. Farming is a dominant part of our landscape, but we've got lots of examples of working with nature and farming to draw from. So again, that can provide leadership. Nature-based solutions are already being deployed. We're seeing that by water companies and government, and that's helping to draw in other funding sources for nature. So there's much more ambition to do more and go further there. And finally, there's a really strong public desire to see more action for nature and play a part in its recovery. So for our last case study, I want to introduce Alex Briggs from Weald to Waves. This is a really exciting, ambitious initiative, which demonstrates a lot of that in action. Over to you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Kate. Good evening, everyone. I hope you're enjoying the presentations we've just had. My name's Alex Briggs, and I manage the Weald to Waves corridor, which is a vision for a 100-mile long nature recovery corridor stretching across East and West Sussex. And the drivers behind the project, Kate's already brought up this evening. Our particular focus is on habitat fragmentation, and Kate's been talking about that urgent need for bigger, better, and more joined up, and indeed faster. So our key focus is looking at reconnecting isolated populations of wildlife as a mechanism across the whole landscape for nature recovery. And there are a number of different ways to do this, and that does include physical linear corridors, but it also includes looking at the sustainable landscape as a whole, and where can we create things like stepping stones to reconnect our core areas for wildlife. So just to illustrate that, this is land cover across the UK. These are figures taken from the BBC, and we've rerun these statistics for our own landscape here in Sussex. And I'm just showing you this to illustrate that we are on average more of a human-dominated landscape by land use than the rest of the UK, or than most of the UK, I should say. So that's around 70% agricultural land, about 9% built up. So that leaves about sort of 16% as a sort of natural space. And so the reason I show you this is really to illustrate that we can't just rely on those natural spaces and protected areas in our landscape to continue to support our wildlife. We need to look at the landscape as a whole, and this puts everyone, including everyone here and everyone in the landscape, in the driving seat for nature recovery, to take guidance like what's going to come out of the local nature recovery strategy, and implement it locally. And these are the founders of the Weald to Waves project, and so this is very related to what I've just said, because there are conservationists standing in this picture, but the interesting thing is that actually about 2/3 of the founders of the project were concerned land managers, and particularly farmers that came together concerned about the declines that they'd seen on their own land. And this is not land that's managed predominantly for nature; it's land that's managed predominantly for food production. And coming together to look at how they can tackle these declines by reconnecting the landscape. And so their ideas and visions were what brought together the Weald to Waves corridor. And really, this is a sample story for connectivity across Sussex. So this mapped out the ecological opportunities in the landscape, but also the human opportunities as well, like those interested land managers and the towns and villages where there is so much action for nature going on. But I mentioned that we need to look beyond those sort of just pure strips of habitat for wildlife and beyond the simple, rather simplistic term wildlife corridor. And so actually we're also looking at things like the business case for nature, and Kate mentioned earlier those essential services that our healthy ecosystems provide us. But also from a local perspective and a community perspective, acting as a vision that people can get behind to drive local action. And so that includes not just now the farmers and land managers, but also all of the community networks and individuals and gardeners within that landscape, and looking at how everyone can see themselves as a stepping stone. I briefly mentioned the business case, and this is a really interesting question because, like I said, we need everyone to engage with nature recovery. And for a lot of people, this can be quite a daunting prospect. It's a journey for a sustainable future, and actually, it's a journey that some people are going on for the first time. And there's no right or wrong answer, but by bringing us together as a network, we can provide a supportive atmosphere for the right options for nature recovery within the landscape and within those different landscapes that Weald to Waves covers. And this is where the corridor is now in terms of pledge land. And I show this really to highlight the diversity of stuff that's going on. Like I said, there's no one option for nature recovery. So within the West Sussex arm of Weald to Waves, we've got the River Ada recovery project looking at the changing management and sustainability of the River Ada floodplain. We've got the Arran to Ada farmer cluster, and we've also got dozens, if not hundreds, of local greening groups springing up. But there are gaps, and we need those individuals and those land managers to come forward and help us to join those dots across the landscape. And so the thought I'm going to leave you on is that whoever you are and whatever you are, whether you're an individual, a gardener, a member of a community group, a member of a council, business, or a farmer, there are ways to get involved. And so engage with your LNRS, join a project, whether it's Weald to Waves or a local one, to get behind that landscape scale action for a sustainable future. Thanks very much, everyone.
Thanks, Alex. That was brilliant. I mean, the Weald to Waves project is it's such an example to us all, really. Okay, so we're nearly there. So what are our immediate next steps? First of all, we need to finish gathering that long list of priorities, and we're aiming to do that by July. And we can then shortlist that. And we've got some draft thinking about potential criteria on the website, so do take a look. Then we can begin. We also want to start mapping all these existing actions for nature. We've got a new mapping tool, which I believe is live on the website as of today. So please do take a look. If you've got a project or something that you're taking part in, we would like to capture that. And we're going to continue having these conversations with landowners and farmers and businesses and community groups. So if you would like to get involved, there are ways that you can do so. If you haven't already, and I know that a lot of you have, please do take the survey. It's amazing information that we're getting out of this. It's open until the 30th of June, so you've just got about 2-3 more weeks left. Do take a look at that new mapping tool, and please add in your projects. They can be projects that are underway. They could be projects that you've got an idea for and you're looking for funding for, but it would be fantastic to start filling out that map so we can understand what's going on. And of course, you can take action for nature at home in your community. We've heard so much about that already today. We've got a new residents page on the website now, with all sorts of links on there and with advice on how you can make changes in your garden, invite nature in, find community groups. And obviously we'll be putting up the links from the various people who have spoken to us today as well. So I just want to finish up now with some thanks. We've reached the end of the webinar. I hope you found it interesting and inspiring. And I want to say a huge thank you to our case studies for sharing their work today. So Adam Hutley from the Sussex Ornithological Society, Tamara Jules from Sussex Wildlife Trust's Youth Rangers programme, to Laura Eastwood from Greening Steyning, and from Alex Briggs from Weald to Waves. And thank you to you as well. Thank you for giving up your valuable time this evening to hear about this work. Thank you and enjoy the rest of your evening.